Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recordings. And today we're talking about one of the trickiest and most difficult pieces in the entire symphonic repertoire. I am speaking of Schubert's Symphony Number 9, sometimes known as 7, sometimes known as 8, the Great C Major Symphony. It's much easier to use a Deutsch listing, right? What is it? Deutsch 944, in case you're curious. But it's Schubert's The Great Symphony in C Major. Why is this piece so difficult? Well, you have to remember, Schubert never heard it. He never heard it performed. He heard it in his head. And it's extremely long, and it is full of tiny little repeated motives. It's like a jigsaw puzzle you have to put together. I mean, the first movement is dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum, so it's all dun 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 dun. It's doing that with triplets, da 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 da, like that. And then the finale has that famous jum ba da dum ba da dum ba da dum ba da dum ba da dum, like that. And then there's the question of what you do with the scherzo, which, if you play all of the repeats, often turns out to be the longest movement in the entire symphony, which is just simply wrong. It's wrong from an expressive point of view. It's wrong from the point of view of formal balance. It's just nuts. And some people today, particularly where all repeats should always be taken, it's a big problem. The piece sounds best, frankly, if you take as few repeats as possible. Maybe the first movement exposition repeat. Certainly, you don't need to do the one at the beginning of the finale. Generally speaking, the fewer repeats, the better you are going to be, and the better the piece works out proportionately. But Schubert was not in a position to really determine any of those things in the most logical possible way, because, like I said, he didn't hear the thing. And it's incredibly tiring for the orchestra to play. And even without the repeats, it's going to last like a good 45 minutes or so. With the repeats, it can last up to an hour, depending on the tempos that you choose. It's a major, major challenge. And then there are all sorts of other questions, like issues of balance. How do you handle the trombones? How do you handle the brass parts? How do you judge the relationship between the opening introduction and the allegro tempo of the main body of the movement? What do you do at the very end when that opening theme on the horns, what do you do when that comes back in the coda? The way Schubert scored it, it's practically inaudible. So everybody adds some brass or something at the end, and it could be horns, it could be trumpets, it could be, what do you do there? There's a taste issue. It's really, really full of pitfalls. And as far as reference recordings go, there have been basically two in the history of the universe. There have been many good recordings of it, don't get me wrong. Fine recordings historically. Toscanini did a very excellent one. Furtwängler always did a great Schubert ninth. But the reference recordings, the ones that were really, had the opportunity to show you what the piece could be and what it could do, and that enjoyed virtually universal respect. Well, the first one, and perhaps the most important one, was this one. George Szell with the Cleveland Orchestra. Yay! And, as we go through this series and we cover the basic German repertoire, Szell and Cleveland, turn out to be a force that's hard to beat when you're talking about reference recordings, because Szell as a conductor was so rich in basic musicality, fundamental musicality, that is, things such as the correct tempos, the best balances, the knowledge of the grasp of the work in its entirety, the relationship between the various parts, his conception of phrasing, and he had the orchestra playing at the highest possible level, basically throughout his career. And he recorded this twice. There's this one on Sony. This is the first one, and there's one on Warner, which is also excellent, but which didn't get the same kind of promotion that this one got. This one really sort of set the standard. And to a very, very large extent, it still does. It really does. It's amazing just how wonderfully this came off. When we were talking about some other pieces here, there were sometimes double, two different reference recordings. And it's really hard to think of modern recordings that have actually lived up to this. Because the only one that really does is one of Günter Vaughn's. Gunter von played it similarly to Szell. It's those basic musical qualities. How to be able to do all the repetition in this piece without making it sound dull. I mean, really, that takes a tremendous effort. It takes thought. And it takes ability. So after this one, which was non-pareil in its ability to deliver the entire enchilada in Schubert's Ninth, there is also this one, Charles Munch. This is in this little box of romantic masterworks. Charles Munch is as different from Szell as can be. It's a very, very different kind of interpretation. And we've talked about this before. In Sibelius' Second Symphony, that was the work where we had Szell, who was absolutely one of the references, versus Barbaroli. Well, that's sort of what's going on here, because Munch was at his best when he just sort of let everything go crazy and was a spontaneous and physical conductor. There are issues in this recording with amazingly well played by the Boston Symphony, which you will hear in no other performances, and some of them may be questionable. For example, the brass band approach to the return of the opening theme in the coda of the first movement. Most people are a little bit discreet. Szell is discreet. He lets you hear the tune with perfect clarity, with a little bit of horn doubling. Munch says, oh, screw it. Do the horns, do the trumpets, do a trombone or two. Who knows? He doesn't care. It's a pageant that's blasting by it. It's thrilling. It's absolutely thrilling. But some eyebrows may be raised. The real issue, the real marvel of this Munch performance actually is the scherzo, because it's probably the quickest that anybody's ever done it, or one of the quickest. It doesn't have any repeats. Yay! Except maybe it takes the first repeat. I don't remember. I mean, I just have no patience for things like that. But he plays it in one. It's a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's phenomenally exciting. It's a genuine scherzo. I mean, he could have even taken the repeats. It would have been okay in this performance as opposed to almost anything else. Because the trio too, particularly, which is this enormous tune, just a through composed melody, basically, in two halves, and you get to hear both of them twice. It can be interminable in other performances, but not here. The whole piece just flies by. It's breathtakingly exciting. And so if there are some incidental details along the way, which Szell would take pains to get absolutely right, and Munch could sort of say, it's okay, we're going for the big picture. And that's what makes the performance so different and so exciting, so thrilling. And, there are so many other versions of this symphony. And like I said, there are some very good ones, both before and after these recordings. The only other version as a reference that I think, might be considered, and I don't have it listed here just because it didn't quite make it, was Joseph Kripp's with the London Symphony Orchestra. That on Decca, that is an extraordinary performance as well. One with a sort of Viennese lilt and Gemütlichkeit, if you want to call it that these performances don't try for. I mean, it's a different style of conducting, but it has warmth and songfulness, and it's absolutely glorious. But it wasn't in print. It wasn't promoted. It wasn't getting the kind of cachet that these did. I mean, really, these both appeared after they were long deleted on compact discs, on mid-price, budgie compact discs. I mean, it gave them a whole new lease on life because you got an incredible amount of bang for your buck. Usually they were coupled with the unfinished symphony too, both of which were very good, if not quite as referencey as the Ninth. But there are no performances of this symphony on period instruments that come anything close to what these guys achieved. In many ways, Schubert's Ninth is a piece of music outside of its time. A lot of late Schubert is like that, isn't it? The quintet and the late quartets, the last piano sonatas, they seem to be not of their era. And when people attempt to play them on period instruments and make them of their era, they lose something. They lose something because the music was Schubert was not exposed to the daily grind of music making on a large scale for his larger works. He really wasn't. And so in a way, he was almost writing for himself. There was a personal quality to all of these pieces, and a bigness of scale. You know, Schubert had lived past 31, or however old he was when he died. Like, the rest of music might not even have been necessary. I mean, he was just growing by leaps and bounds from one work to the next. And so the Ninth Symphony is very, very much something which was a discovery. It was a new discovery. It's a new discovery for whatever era discovers it, just about. And so if you play it with modern instruments in a big orchestra, and you really need to do things like double the winds and double the horns and in spots to deal with the balance issues. If you do that, then it works perfectly well. It absolutely works perfectly well. There is nothing in this symphony that is more effective on period instruments, and a lot that's less. And that I think is an unassailable fact. I don't care what anybody says. And there have been, you know, there's Charles Baccaris with the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, which is a very good performance on period instruments, but it's nothing like these. Nothing like these in terms of polish, discipline, imagination. They're both extraordinary. So there you go for Schubert's Ninth. If you want a reference recording, you got to get Szell to start with, and you really should have Munch too, because they are the twin faces of this music. You know, the Apollonian and the Dionysian, if you want to call it that. They really do give you the deepest, let's put it that way, Schubertian experience. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me, and take care.